It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back. This is episode number 19, Beneath the Helmet. Today, I'm joined with author, speaker, and retired law enforcement officer, Michael Sugrue. Michael is a retired police sergeant and also a former Air Force captain. In today's episode, Michael shares his efforts to smash the stigma around mental health and the issues about reaching out for help. He tells his story about his challenges with PTSD after several very traumatic incidents, including a fatal officer shooting in 2012. Unfortunately, Michael had to medically retire due to his traumatic stress injury, but this is also where his life changed, allowing for better awareness around PTSD and suicide prevention for first responders. Part of Michael's mission has been public speaking across North America and the world, but most recently, his latest publication of his best-selling book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. This book is very interesting and one of a kind in regards to how it's formatted. The book was co-written with Dr. Springer, and she talks about how the experiences that Michael discusses in his chapters and the experiences and what he felt, the emotions, she also unravels that in an easy to understand way about how it's affecting the body, the mind, the nervous system during these stressful events. So I hope you enjoy this episode with retired Sergeant Michael Sugrue, and make sure you pick up a copy of his book. Pretty awesome. Until next time, stay well. All right. Welcome, Michael. I'm glad you can join us on Beneath the Helmet. Welcome to the show.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. For our audience on the Beneath the Helmet, tell us a little bit of who Michael is, your background, where you came from, and what brought you up through the police service.
That's a long story. I'll try to make it short. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. And for me, my interest in law enforcement and the military actually started at a very young age. And I was actually a police volunteer at 8 years old, eventually a police explorer in high school. And my original plan was to go into federal law enforcement, into the FBI or DEA here in the United States. And I knew if I wanted to do that, I had to go to college first off and get a degree. But I also needed some work experience in addition to just having that criminal justice degree. So I looked into scholarships and I got a full scholarship through the Air Force ROTC program. And I was commissioned in 1998 as a second lieutenant right out of college. I had majored in criminal justice, minored in psychology, and I got my first career choice, which was security forces. And that's basically military police, anti-terrorism, force protection, air-based ground defense. And basically I was going to do 4 years. That was it. Do my commitment, get out, go federal. And while I was there, a bunch of different things happened, 9/11 being one of them. And I was actually in Germany when that happened. And a short time later, I found myself in the Middle East. And I ended up actually staying in a little bit longer. I did almost 6.5 years active duty. I got out in 2004 as a captain, and I was already stationed back here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I immediately transitioned into civilian law enforcement. I was hired by the Walnut Creek Police Department, and I started out like most officers do, working the streets. A short time later, I was actually promoted to field training officer, where I trained officers right out of the academy, but also lateral officers from different agencies. And then I was promoted to detective, and I was actually undercover for a couple of years on a California state drug task force. So basically like the state version of the DEA. And that was literally my dream. That's what I aspired to. And some things happened there, and that assignment was taken away, and I got sent back to my local agency. And after that, I was promoted to sergeant, and that's where I was running patrol teams on the street. And that's really where my kind of current story starts. I was involved in a very traumatic incident as a brand new police sergeant. And that incident really, it changed my career. It changed my path. It changed my life. It changed everything. Eventually, I ended up medically retiring in 2018 for what I like to call post-traumatic stress injury versus disorder. And now I'm on a mission to literally speak around the world and smash the stigma when it comes to talking about mental health and suicide prevention.
I love it because that's what this podcast is all about, is smashing that stigma. That's for sure.
And that's what I do every single day. So my life is now dedicated to smashing that stigma
Good
because
for you.
that stigma is what prevented me for asking for help. I literally suffered in silence for over 4 years. And it got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I started putting myself in dangerous situations, hoping I was killed in the line of duty.
Yeah, I watched a video of you talking about considering some days just stepping back into traffic. What would that be like? So, yeah, that's suffering in silence. It's a tough one, and it's throughout the whole first responder agency across the world. Is we need to smash that stigma that it's okay to talk. It's natural to talk. It's human to talk.
It is. That's the ironic part of it is the solution to all this is actually very simple. And like you said, it's just having those conversations, whether it be day to day or when big incidents come up. But what's key to that is having that culture that allows for that, knowing that your conversation is going to be protected. It's going to be confidential. It's not going to have negative repercussions on your career, assignments, promotions. And that's really what it is. And we make it so difficult and complicated, but in reality, like you just said, it's being human. It's acknowledging the humanity of what we see and do every single day.
You think that was your inside voice telling you that it wasn't safe to speak up, or was that the culture that you were in didn't allow for that? Or what do you think
I
there?
think honestly, it's a combination of both. I go all the way back to my initial military training, and we're trained to be warriors. We're trained to believe that we're invincible, and we're trained to go in the most dangerous situations without hesitation to protect and serve and literally put our lives on the line. And I think, part of that is if we then acknowledge our feelings or talk about emotions, somehow that would make us weak and make us less good at what we do. And I don't think that's true, but I can take that even a step further. And when I talk about being a man as young boys, it starts there. We're raised not to talk about our feelings or not to show emotions. And we just carry that on through our entire life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate. My emotion that I had a difficult time processing and expressing was anger. And it wasn't anger in outlashing, it was holding all in, holding in the anger, holding in the frustration, never showing it, bottling it up, which caused me a lot of harm versus getting explosive and angry out, projecting out to other people. So it's a toxic emotion to hold in or show in unsafe and unhealthy ways, right?
Absolutely. Very toxic. And it's going to lead to physical health issues, mental health issues, and then it's going to have a domino effect into our families and into our personal relationships. And it affects everyone around us, not just ourselves.
What was the final straw or the kind of final conclusion that you needed some further help and support, either retire or you needed some additional support outside of yourself?
Another very tragic incident. After my shooting that I talked about, I endured a 4-year federal lawsuit where I actually ended up on trial in San Francisco in federal court.
Mm.
We ended up prevailing. Literally, we saved a couple. There was a man armed with a butcher knife that was trying to kill a couple barricaded inside their bedroom. And that subject then tried to kill myself and fellow responding officers. But we were sued immediately. Like I said, this drug on for many years.
Mm.
And I told myself that once this lawsuit was over, because I blamed everything on that as long as we prevailed, all my problems would go away. But in reality, the lawsuit actually made things much, much worse. And sitting there in court, in trial for 2 weeks, and just hearing these crazy, outlandish theories by the plaintiff's attorneys really started to make me second guess and question my actions that fateful night.
Mm.
And about a couple months after that, a week after actually Thanksgiving, so the trial ended September 2016. And now we're talking about a week after Thanksgiving 2016. One of my best friends, his name is John Davison. And we talk about this in our new book, and he has his own chapter in my book, but he was a Vietnam veteran. He was an Army military soldier, and he had endured a lot of just horrific things that he never talked about, things that he never shared with me. And then he was a reserve officer with my agency. He actually volunteered 35 years of his life protecting and serving. And that's how I got to know him. We used to ride together, and he had retired just a few years earlier before this incident happened. And I was on duty. I was the day shift patrol sergeant getting ready to go home. And then a suicide in progress call came out. And it turned out that it was at my friend John's house. And my friend John had tried to take his own life. He had literally split both wrists. He had stabbed himself in the torso multiple times. He had OD'd on multiple prescription medications. And I had just gotten to the regional trauma center when the ambulance brought him in, covered in blood, in and out of consciousness. And I remember I just had a few seconds with him before they rushed him off to emergency surgery. And I remember looking him in the eyes and telling him that he was going to make it through this, that he was going to survive. But deep down, I really didn't think he was. And I remember waiting for hours in that hospital, just feeling guilt and shame of why I didn't do something to help stop this or prevent it. Why didn't I see the warning signs that my own friend was suffering so bad to the point where he tried to kill himself? And then all I could think about was my young daughter at the time and about how she would feel, what would be the ripple effects on her if I died in the line of duty from purposely putting myself in these dangerous situations. So thank God he ended up coming out of surgery and he survived. He's alive today, doing very well. We talk all the time, and I tell him that he saved my life that day by trying to take his own life,
Wow.
because about a month after that is when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help of 4 years of literally just suffering in silence, losing my marriage, losing everything around me to the point where I almost lost my life again.
Mm. Wow. That's a story and a half. Who was the first when you decided you need to reach out? Who did you reach out to? Like a friend or a professional or?
No, so I remember that day I literally broke down in my car. It was on the anniversary of my shooting. And I just cried in my car for 2 hours. And I remember just getting to the point where finally I just pulled out my cell phone and I called the on-duty watch commander for my police department. I didn't know who was going to answer or who was going to be on the other end because I didn't know which lieutenant was working that day. But thank goodness one of my friends, he's now a captain, he still works there, a great man, but he listened to me and he had the patience and we talked. And he assured me that everything was going to be okay. And he immediately connected me with one of our culturally competent therapists that we had contracted with the department. And he started making notifications to my chief and my captains and got that ball rolling to get the help that I needed.
That's good. That's great to hear. So going back to the tragic day of the shooting, it's a horrible day, a tragic day. What lessons do you learn from that day that are propelling you forward?
Well, that day, in an instant, this feeling of invincibility that I had my entire military career, my entire law enforcement career up to that point, it was just gone. I remember going out there every single day just feeling untouchable, that no one was ever going to harm me. No one was going to hurt me. And in that moment where I almost lost my life, it changed that. And I realized how precious life is. I realize now how important family is, how important my daughter is, and everyone around me. At that time, I was so focused on my career. I was so focused on advancing and promoting. And someday I want to be chief of police. But now I look back at all these things I endured, how horrific and horrible they were, but it put me in a place today where I'm truly living life to the fullest. I'm living a better life now than I ever have. I'm more involved and more present as a father, as a partner than I ever was. And so I really look at it as a second chance at life. And I think a lot of people, they get so down and so desperate and they get this feeling that no one's going to understand them. No one's going to relate to what they're feeling. And that's how I thought. But in the work that I do now, I've met countless men and women, all areas of first responders, whether that's police officers, firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, military members. But there's such a huge support system out there, and there's endless programs and opportunities where people can turn to and get this help. Programs and things that I was never aware of. I had no idea.
Definitely. I just finished a 2-day workshop on ASSIST, which is suicide intervention. And I thought that was probably one of the most incredible programs and courses that I've ever taken. It was a 2-day workshop, but it told me and it taught me how to comfortably talk about suicide, how to say the word, how to approach somebody, how to talk to them through their intervention. Seems like a simple thing. Like I thought I knew what suicide meant, what it was all to do with, and I've never experienced it myself, being having tendencies for that, but I've dealt with people who are suicidal. But this 2-day workshop, the assist program, now I feel I really have a comfort level where I can talk to somebody and say, are you going to kill yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And I think that's a program that I think, like you said, education wise, suicide intervention, suicide awareness, and I know that's what you're doing as well, is so critical across North America and the world.
It really is. And I'm not familiar with that exact program, but what I will tell you, what I have learned is what is so important and that we can all do is that if we expect somebody to be vulnerable with us and to open up to us, whether that's a coworker, a peer, a family member, somebody on the street, we oftentimes have to be vulnerable ourselves. We have to show our own humanity and form that trust with somebody to where they feel comfortable opening up to us. And as an example, I think of all levels of supervision within an agency. This doesn't matter whether we're talking about firefighters, paramedics, as dispatchers, it applies to all. But how on earth is an employee going to go to their supervisor or their manager and say, look, I've got a problem here and I need help. I need you to help me. How are they going to get that comfort level? How are they going to have that trust? And it all starts with being vulnerable yourself. We all have a story. We've all been through things, whether that's job related, personal related. It's part of life. But we need to get rid of this perfect image that we all want to portray. We put on this badge and this uniform and we show this outward appearance of strength and resilience and bravery and courage. But I'm going to tell you right now, it takes real strength and courage to be vulnerable, to share what you've gone through and how you've endured and how you came out the other side. And that's what I do. I'm just sharing my own example. And it turns out that it resonates with just endless people out there because I'm not unique or special. Nothing that I've been through is. It's just that I'm willing to openly talk about it, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts to ask you, was how you felt being vulnerable and open, especially in your book that we'll talk about in a bit, how open and transparent you were about your experience. Was that a difficult transition?
It was extremely difficult because I never did that my entire life. I was that person who was the perfect Air Force captain, boots always polished, uniform perfect, hair high and tight. And same thing when I went to law enforcement and my career was off the charts. I was literally getting every assignment and position that I wanted, getting promoted quicker than anyone had. And so I was living a lie. Again, it was this outward appearance that everything was perfect, while inside everything was falling apart. And I remember when I first asked for that help, I was so ashamed, embarrassed. In fact, when I started my journey of recovery, and it was the very beginning of 2017, my plan was to go back to work. That was my plan all along. But during that time, going to counseling, going to first responder support meetings, going to week-long programs like the West Coast post-trauma retreat, I still felt embarrassed and ashamed. And although I talked to people within those very small circles, I didn't talk to anyone at my agency. I didn't tell anyone why I was off work. And then fast forward to when I medically retired in the summer of 2018, I still didn't tell anybody that I worked with that I retired for post-traumatic stress injury. Because still there was this just overwhelming sense of just shame and embarrassment and a feeling of being weak. And how this whole path got started, I truly believe everything happens for a reason. But about a year after I retired, this guy named Danny Bird, he was a former law enforcement officer. He was very big in health and fitness like I am. I didn't know him, but he found me on LinkedIn and he reached out to me. He was a podcast host and he asked me to be on his show. And I said, you know what? I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to do that. I don't feel comfortable doing it. It's not my thing. And thank God this guy literally harassed me. He kept bothering me to the point where finally I agreed to do it. And he said, look, I'm going to drive the 2.5 hours up to you. I just need an hour of your time. That's it. And so I remember we met at this cafe. I walk in, he's in the back room. He's got laptops on the table, camera set up, headphones set up. I thought we were going to get to know each other, have breakfast, but he's like, hey, I'm really sorry, but I've got only an hour. So we got to do this and I got to get out of here and get back on the road. So I sat down. He started asking me questions and I just answered him. I answered him straight from the heart. I didn't think about him. I didn't hold back. And then a couple weeks later, when this got released, this feeling of control where I was trying to keep it all in because of the shame and embarrassment, I couldn't do that anymore. It was literally out there for the world to see and hear. And this is where the magic happened because I started getting messages from all over the world from other first responders who started sharing their stories with me and talking about how certain things I said resonated with them. And that started this momentum of just podcast after podcast, which led to speaking and eventually led to this best-selling book that came out a year ago. And that's the ironic thing is because I was one to never talk about my emotions, to never talk about my feelings. And in this book, I bare my soul. I bare it all. Like I said, the good, the bad, the ugly. But I'm to the point today where there is no more shame. There is no more embarrassment because like I said, I know it was the most courageous and bravest thing I've ever done was raising my hand and asking for that help.
Could not agree more. Beautiful. Yep. Could not agree more. Talking about your book, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman says it's one of the most important books out there for first responders to read. Why do you think he said that?
The book it's Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. And the book, it's very unique. As far as I know, there's no other book out there like this. Dr. Springer, first I want to talk about her. So she's my co-author. She's a clinical psychologist. She's worked with first responders and combat veterans most of her career. So she truly understands us. And she's heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories. And again, I didn't know her. She reached out to me on LinkedIn. She just wanted to introduce herself, have a phone call to let me know about the work she's doing. And then I told her my story, the story that is in this book, my story all the way from childhood until present day. And she asked me at the time, this is before COVID happened, have you ever thought about writing a book? I said, honestly, I've been asked that before, but I don't think I have that drive and that determination and that willpower to get something like that done. And so we left the conversation at that. A couple months later, she hit me back up and she said, look, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories, but your story, for some reason, it's just sticking with me. And I think your story is going to help save countless lives. And she said, I want to make this book happen. I want to do this book with you. And without hesitation, I knew in my heart it was right. I said, let's do this. And so COVID happens and we literally didn't even meet in person. For the first year of this, we did Zoom meetings every week for 2 hours long. And the thing about this book, like I said, what makes it so unique is that every chapter is split into two parts. The first part is my story told in my voice, but the second half of every chapter, Dr. Springer, she breaks it down. She explains it in layman's terms, very easy to understand terms where anybody will get it, will truly see the human side behind the badge and behind the uniform. And you don't have to know a single first responder or a single person in the military, but you're now going to truly see the real people behind the uniforms. And this book is not just for military first responders. This book is for their loved ones, their family members. This book is for everyone out there just on the streets. Literally, this book, it's saving relationships, it's saving careers, but more importantly, it's saving lives every single day.
Yes, I love how you structured that. I don't know if I've seen a book like that before where it's a two-part in the chapter. When I
Well,
saw,
usually,
when I saw that,
yeah,
I was like, that stands out. That's awesome. I like that.
it does. And that's the thing is that this is living proof of the collaboration between a first responder and a culturally competent clinician.
So,
It's living proof to show the power of that, the power of that trust. When I trusted Dr. Springer literally with my life during this project. And that's the thing is that this book proves it. It proves that if you can trust the right person to open up and to share and to know that they fully have your back, then healing is possible, that you can recover from post-traumatic stress. That's why I call it an injury, PTSI versus disorder, PTSD, because this isn't something that you're stuck with. You truly can get better, but it takes work. It takes a lot of different things. And there's not one magic thing that works for everybody. For most people, it's a combination of things that you have to do over a period of time. And yeah, historically, you have to go out and either buy a book that's like a gut wrenching story and that's it, or go buy a clinical textbook on psychology. And this literally has both in one.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great way to do it. Good job on that. At the end of the podcast, we'll share how to get everyone a copy of that in their hands. And we'll make sure there's links in our show notes on how to access all of that. So I know, I believe it was the doctor who said this, but talks about stoicism in the emergency services and how it can be a good thing and a bad thing. What's your thoughts on stoicism in the police service or first responder world?
I think at times it's very necessary. When we're out there in a very chaotic, hectic scene, we do have to be the ones that take charge and bring calm to disorder. So I think when we're operational and we're in it, there's a time and place for that. But I think after we leave those horrific scenes and we're back, whether it's in our patrol cars or fire engines with our partners, or we're back at the station or back at the firehouse, that's where we need to drop that stoicism and we need to be our real selves. We need to feel comfortable talking to each other and sharing, like I said, our real feelings and our real thoughts, because more often than not, we turn to gallows humor, which is where we joke about these very horrific things. We deflect, we pretend, we disassociate. None of these things are going to bother us. And that works for a while, but these things build up and build up. If you're not addressing, it's going to get to the point over time, like I did, where it all boils over.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think there's lots of cases for being stoic on a fire scene or a police scene or whatever kind of emergency scene you're at. But there's a time to pull down that shield and show your true human self, right? When you're back at the station, back in the hall, with your family and friends, there's a time to turn that off. And that's where
Absolutely.
I failed as well. I kept that on all the time. My armor was always on, always protected, and it just ate me up inside.
Absolutely.
So I love asking people about what they do for their own self-care now. What kind of nuggets could you share with the audience that really help bring you out of post-traumatic injury through your ordeals and now thriving today? What do you do on a regular basis?
For me, routine is very important. So every day I go to the gym. I usually go to the gym for 2 hours. I do a combination of weightlifting, and then I usually do 4 miles on the treadmill. And usually, if I can, I work out with a partner. I've got two really close friends. One is currently in law enforcement. We went to the police academy. The other one is someone I've known since college. We were both in the Air Force together. And while I'm at that gym, I'm in a social environment. I've got my buddies who I trust completely, where we can literally talk about anything and everything. And the exercise part for me has always been one of my biggest stress relievers. And then usually after the gym, I'll go out to lunch with one of them or both of them, come back home, and then I'll meditate. I'll meditate for 30 minutes before I hop in the shower. I do still see a therapist. I don't go every week like I used to, but every 2 weeks I see a therapist. And again, people think therapy is a big deal, but it's just someone you can talk to where it's private, it's protected. And oftentimes I'm just talking about things that I'm dealing with in my personal life, because we all have issues that come up, whether that's health problems, financial problems, relation problems, parenting problems. And I've got somebody who was listening to me. They're not judging me. They're offering me advice. They're trying to help me. And it gets it where I'm getting it off my chest. I'm getting it off my shoulders.
Totally.
And at the end of the day, I like to practice gratitude. And so every day before I go to bed, I think of 3 positive things that happened that day. And the thing is, sometimes people think nothing good happened today. And it's not that complicated. One could be literally like, I woke up today.
Totally.
I got out of bed, right? Or I went to the gym. I had a good workout. Or I went out to lunch with my buddy and we had a great conversation about something. Or I picked up my daughter from school and we went and got frozen yogurt. Whatever the case may be, I took my dog for an awesome walk or I went for a hike, but we can all find at least 3 positive things that have happened to us in a day. And so when you practice this gratitude, especially before you go to sleep, you're left with positive thoughts in your mind. And so when you finally do go to sleep, it helps reduce nightmares, night terrors, things like that. And generally you wake up in a good mood, feeling refreshed and feeling positive and feeling grateful.
Did you have any challenges with sleep and addiction, anything like that through your times that you had to fix and get out of that process during your kind of rehab portion?
I did have an issue with alcohol as far as a coping mechanism for my post-traumatic stress. I would never consider myself an alcoholic or an addict. I still drink today socially, usually on the weekends if I'm out going to a concert or going to an event, maybe a couple glasses of wine a week. I learned to lessen the amount when I drink or why I'm drinking. And part of that was going to 12-step meetings or first responder support meetings. And part of that is just, like I said, focusing on my health, but not just my mental health, but my physical health. And for me personally, it wasn't one of those things where I had to give it up or stop it altogether. But in the work that I do work with a lot of people who are alcoholics and who are addicts. And that's the other thing is that in my journey, I used to judge people like that. I used to look down upon people like that when I was a police officer. I was a very black and white person. But now I have a whole different perspective. And usually when I meet somebody who's an addict or an alcoholic, I have compassion, I have empathy, I have understanding. And there's usually a reason why they're using these negative coping mechanisms because they haven't dealt with that underlying trauma, whether that's childhood trauma, work related trauma, it could be institutional trauma or admin betrayal. And in my case, it was a combination of all three of those things.
So now that you're going into police stations and other first responders across North America, are you seeing a better buy-in of your message, or is there still a wall up that you're still trying to get through, smashing that stigma?
Things have definitely improved from when my shooting first happened at the end of 2012. But I can tell you that depending on where I go, each agency is different. And there's
Mhm.
different parts of the country, different parts of states that aren't progressive as others. And so I still hear lots of horror stories from people who have tried to get help, or when they have asked for help, they've been shunned or outcasted or faced, like I said, admin betrayal. And that's one of the big things that I talk about in my book. And you and I haven't talked about it yet during this conversation, but initially my agency was very supportive in my recovery. But when it got to the point where it wasn't happening quick enough, then they wanted to get rid of me. It was kind of like one of those things where, hey, if you're not going to be back to work like next week, then have you thought about retiring? And it was like, no, I've never thought about retiring. And then a series of just horrific things started happening where my agency turn their back on me. And that's the real problem is that admin betrayal. And that's usually the thing that pushes people over the edge. And yeah, we've come a long way, but I will tell you, we have much, much more work to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the admin betrayal because it was a big thing for in my life as well. But I correlate it, and I'm sure you're well versed in this, but moral injury. Moral injury to me was different than maybe a soldier would experience. But when I was seeing unethical and stuff that just went against my beliefs, my core values, it hurt me to the core because I'm a very heart-led leader. That's how I lead. That's how I show up. And that hurt me internally as a leader, seeing this stuff go on that I had no control over. So it relates to that. Could you experience any moral injury in your life as well?
Absolutely. And oftentimes this moral injury goes back to childhood. It's no accident that many first responders and military members choose these professions. It's more of a calling. And in my case, I would say it was more of benign childhood trauma. I had a father who was emotionally distant. He was an alcoholic. He was an addict. But in many cases, it could be as extreme as physical abuse, sexual abuse. And these things that happen to us early on in life actually make us very good at what we do. It makes us resilient. We overcome adversity. We become decisive. We become caretakers. And like I said, once we're out there in the fire uniform or police officer uniform, we become very successful and very good at what we do. But the problem is we just push that away. We never actually deal with that childhood trauma. And so when this moral injury or admin or institutional betrayal happens, it's like that childhood trauma all comes back. And now it's compounded with what we thought was a family, right? We thought was this blue family or red family where, these people had our back and they cared about us and would do anything for us. And then when we truly find out that no, we're just a number filling a position. And then when we need them most, they're not there. They abandon us.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that was an important factor in my life. And I think that's an important factor in a lot of people's lives. Some even say it's more prevalent than PTSI.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is when Doc Springer and I wrote this book, we thought that the trauma part, the suicide part was what was going to be that resonates with most people.
Mm.
And it turns out that it's actually that moral injury
Mm.
and admin betrayal that's resonating with so many people because it's like that elephant in the room, the thing that nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to acknowledge. And most people think it's only happening to them because our agencies are so good at ordering us not to talk about this or not talk about that and not to share our discussion. And it turns out that the people to our left and right are dealing with the same exact things with their bosses or their administration.
What's one key message you'd love to have the Beneath the Helmet listeners hear from you and your aspect of what you've learned through life to help them thrive in life once again?
I'll just tell you that if you're out there suffering in silence and struggling and you feel alone, you think that no one's going to get it. No one's going to understand how you're feeling right now. I can assure you you're wrong because I felt that same exact way. And I promise you that if you get the strength and courage to raise your hand and ask for help, there's going to be help. There's going to be countless resources. And I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. My journey was very difficult and there was a lot of ups and downs. But if you stick with it and you keep an open mind and you try different things, knowing that not everything is going to work for you, I assure you there's a whole new life on the other side of this.
There's hope.
Absolutely. There's hope and there's help.
So how can people learn more about you, follow you on social, connect with you, reach out to you? And most of all, how can they get your new book?
So Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. And it's actually been a #1 bestseller in both Canada and the United States. It's doing phenomenally well. So it's available on Amazon. Thank you very much. It's on Amazon. It's available in hardcover, paperback. It's also on Kindle. And actually last night we just uploaded the audiobook or the Audible version. You can go on Audible, you can go on iTunes, and you can actually hear our story in our own voices because Doc Springer and I, we did this recording straight from our heart in our own voices. Now, as far as how to get a hold of me, I'm on pretty much every platform out there. All you have to do is type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue, Sugrue. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Truth, Parler, TikTok, LinkedIn. I'm on every single platform. I check my messages every single day. And if you send me a message, I assure you, I will definitely get back to you.
Fantastic. What kind of new projects or new initiatives do you have launching for this year, 2023? Anything coming up?
I'll be honest with you. I'm fully retired from work and I have a 12-year-old daughter who is my everything. She's my life. I have her half the time, full time. And my priority is living life to the fullest. For me, I do speak nationally, but I limit it to 4 or 5 times a year. That's it. I just got back from Maine and I'm actually going to Florida in August and I'm going to Virginia in September and I'm done for the year. I'm not doing any more speaking engagements till the following year. For me, it's my only goal or project is living life right now.
Love
That's it.
Yeah, you can't beat that. And good boundaries.
Exactly.
Good boundaries you have that you've set in place that you're not running yourself ragged doing. Because I know speaking can be one of those gigs that can tire you out very fast. Sometimes you can be in the air for 200 some odd days a year. And that's it's not the life I want to
Exactly.
live. Yeah.
No, and I just had a horrible experience where I was stuck in the airport for 10 hours and had to stay the night and be driven 2 hours to another airport. And yeah, so it takes a lot out of me. And it's not just the traveling part, but I'll be honest with you, I hate public speaking. I get nervous, I get anxiety, but I also know that when I do it, I'm helping people. And I'm also helping myself because sharing is healing. It's not only healing for ourselves, but it's healing for other people. And we all have a story. Every single person listening to this, watching this, you have your own story and your story can help heal other people. So I encourage you, whether it's in just a simple conversation, it's on a podcast, it's at your agency, consider sharing your story because it will help you as well.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it there. Perfect. What is one question that I did not ask you that you wish I asked you?
I would say, what's one of your biggest regrets in your professional career? It's
So,
probably the question I would have asked me.
yeah. So what's the biggest regret?
I would say one of the biggest regrets is early on, I made a conscious decision that I would never bring work home, that I would never talk about the job with my family. And I truly thought I was protecting them. I was shielding them from the ugliness of what we do. But what happened is I further isolated my spouse at the time. We've since divorced. I lost my marriage, but I didn't have that healthy, established relationship early on. And I'm not talking about sharing the gritty, nasty, ugly details of the job, but I'm talking about communication. I'm talking about when you come home in a bad mood because of something you saw that day at work, that you simply express that and maybe just say, look, I went to a really bad car accident. I just need some time to decompress. Just give me like an hour. I'm going to go for a short walk, come back, take a shower, and then we can talk, we can have dinner, that type of thing. Because when I came home, my family was walking on eggshells around me because they didn't know that. They just assumed it was something they did wrong. And that's where this communication comes in. And so when I waited 8 years and when that shooting happened, it was too late for me. It was too late to open up those lines of discussion and communication. So if there's people listening or watching to this, share, talk about it. Don't make them think that it's them that's putting you in that bad mood. Express what you had to deal with or what's going on at work because your family matters more than your job. It matters more than your career. Your family are the ones that surely have your back.
Yes.
You've got to let them in. And I never did. So that's my biggest regret.
Yep. Yep. But also maybe your biggest lesson that now you're living what you learned from that mistake or that blind spot that you had.
Absolutely. And it's never
Yeah.
too late. So
Yep.
no matter where you're
Yep.
at, it's never too late to start right now.
Yeah. Awesome. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to chat with you, and thank you for your service, both in the military and police. And I wish you all the best with your future and retirement and with your daughter and living the best life that Michael can. So thank you for
Likewise,
joining us.
brother. And I hope to see you in person in Canada one of these days at an event.
Yes,
So I'm looking forward to
that'd
that.
be amazing. Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for joining with Michael. Stay well.